guys, I am Beth with Association of Paranormal Study. I'm sorry if you saw that first video. We're working out the kinks on the live stream. We are here at Albans Sanatorium tonight, and we're going to be live streaming some of our investigation for you guys. I am the historian on the team. I love to dig in and find out about all the awesome things about a location. So I am here to tell you a little bit about this place. Long before St. Albans was a building, this land had a lot of things going on. To the north of this area, pretty famous massacre happened called the Draper's Meadow Massacre. It was in 1755. There was a small army outpost where it was on a day where most people were gone and some of the villagers were still there, and there was obviously tension between the Western what is the word I'm trying to say here? I don't know. The people who were settled there and the Shawnee people. And the Shawnee came into the village one day and slaughtered 5 of the villagers, including a baby, where they took the baby and they smashed its head against the wall. There was an older gentleman where they cut off his head, put it in a bag. It's really not funny. Put it in a bag and then took it over to their neighbor's house and said an acquaintance was there to visit. So it was a little brutal, a little bit, and there's a lot of residual energy, obviously, from such a horrific act. Then in the Civil War, this land was site to the Battle of Cloyd's Mountain, which is considered one of the most gruesome battles in Civil War history. It lasted only about an hour, and over 1,200 men were lost in an hour. Most of it was hand-to-hand combat. Apparently, it was just brutal and awful, and kind of just even more gruesome than you can comprehend. So that happened on this land, and that was in, of course, the Civil War. Now, the history of this building started in 1892. A professor called George Miles built the St. Albans Lutheran School for Boys. He had kind of this forward-thinking way of schools that a lot of colleges use nowadays, where he recruited strong young men athletes for his school. His idea was strength and athletics over scholarly, pursuits or whatever. So he would recruit these athletes, and they were very wealthy families coming in to this area to send their kids to this school. Actually, this building here is part of the original school. It had a great football team and baseball team. They were first in the state several years. So kind of this philosophy that's now used for a lot of colleges, where we, hold our athletes to a different standard, was started here. Unfortunately, there was a minor stock market crash, and that was around the turn of the century, and George Miles lost his money, and the funding for the school started depleting, admissions started depleting. So only, about 12 years into the school's history, it closed. So it was prestigious there for about a half a second. A couple of years after the school closed, Dr. J.C. King saw this building and saw its potential at the beginning of the era of psychology and psychiatry, and decided to create a mental facility that would work towards rehabilitation, which was kind of unheard of at the time. At that point, there were a lot of poor houses and asylums where we would just stick people who had mental illness instead of trying to figure out what was going on and help them. Unfortunately, what that meant at the time was the things that we look back at in horror, right? That's electroshock therapy and hydrotherapy and things that today are considered barbaric. At that point were considered kind of revolutionary and on the cusp of being, something that that was brand new and exciting in the world of psychiatry. So that's what he did here. It was really considered a good facility, kind of state of the art. They would do insulin coma therapy here, electroconvulsive therapy, hydroshock therapy. There's documented suicides here. In 1980, there was a big expansion to kind of keep up with the technological advances of psychiatric facilities, and so that's what the rest of this giant building is. And it's huge, guys. I mean, we went through a tour earlier, and this place is an absolute maze. I would not want to get stuck in one of these spots by myself because I would have no idea how to get out. Now, the facility itself permanently closed in 2004, though admissions were dwindling at that point. But that's the history of the building itself. The part of the history of this location that I was most intrigued by was this rumor that a woman who was killed in Radford, Virginia, her name was Gina Hall, and I actually have a picture of her if you want to see. That is Gina Hall. And if you go to any paranormal site about St. Albans, they would talk about how Gina Hall's ghost haunted this location, which quite frankly didn't make a lot of sense. She wasn't a patient here. She was murdered in 1980 by a man named Stephen Epperly. She was at a party at a nightclub, and Epperly was one of her friends. He convinced her to go to a river house. The New River's right behind this area. And she called her sister from the house, and that was the last anybody heard from her. The next day, her sister reported her missing, and from there, a series of events. Blood found in the cabin. Her car was found just down the road from the sanatorium here, just a few hundred yards away from the building. Her car was found with bloodied clothing and towels. Over the next couple of weeks, they were finding her clothes on one side of town, and you know, other pieces of evidence somewhere else, where eventually they had enough evidence to charge Stephen Epperly with murder. And he actually became the first person in Virginia to be charged and convicted of a murder without them ever finding a body. Again, what does that have to do with St. Albans? Why would her ghost be found here? So I started digging a little bit, and I actually found an article that had been archived in a newspaper in this area back when Epperly was going for a retrial about a decade ago. And I was reading the comments, and I found a comment by a retired police officer named Kenneth Ramsey. He was an officer in the area in 1980 during the murder. And he was talking about how he couldn't believe that nobody had ever looked at the foundations of the hospital during the murder, and that he went on to explain in this comment that Epperly he worked for a construction company, and his job was to pour the gravel down in the foundations, oh, there goes my paper, in the foundations of a building before the concrete was poured on. And right as this murder was happening, he was actually laying the gravel work. Alex is getting my paper for me. Thank you, Alex. Very good job. He was actually pouring the gravel of the expansion on St. Albans Hospital in 1980, as well as another building across the street or in this general area. And since they were finding all this evidence everywhere, nobody was looking here because they were finding clothes on the other side of town and this and that. But her car was only found a few hundred feet from here with those bloody towels and such. So his theory was that her body was, of course, in these gravel pits that were made into the foundations of the new building. I was actually able to get a hold of this officer, and I was able to speak to him, and he went on to explain he actually knew Stephen Epperly personally. He was one of his friends, and that he actually really liked this guy, except if you saw his temper come out, and that this man was violent, and if you made his temper come out, it was scary. and that he had no doubt in his mind that he was the one who killed Gina Hall. But he also had no doubt that Gina Hall's body was in one of these foundations. He said it was disappointing when they decided to charge him because there was enough evidence, there was no reason to continue searching. But he always felt like it was the perfect way to hide a body. It was poured over concrete. There's no trace of her after that point. So the question is I'm not sure. Alex is asking which area is the new area. I know that these are the original buildings to the home. So I'm thinking that this is the new wing that was built in 1980. So the question is, Gina Hall, who is said to haunt the St. Albans Sanatorium, is she underneath these buildings that Stephen Epperly helped lay the foundation for the days during this investigation? So I found it pretty amazing. I couldn't find that on a single paranormal website. I've not seen anybody else come up with this kind of historical evidence towards that. But it's more compelling to me why she would be here. Otherwise, what the heck is she doing here? Why would you stay here? Except for that her poor body has never been recovered, and she's trying to get through to somebody. So we will definitely be seeing if we can get through to Gina tonight. We've learned about a lot of other places through the building. We've had some interesting experiences already. We've had, sorry, I need a water. We had somebody stick his head behind a little curtain and whistle just to see what was back there, and somebody whistled straight back in his face, and this was just during our tour. We've had some really interesting experiences already, so stay tuned on our page. We're going to be live streaming throughout the night from different locations throughout the facility and see what we can capture for you guys. So I hope to see you guys soon. I'll see y'all later. Have a good night.